Wow, an applause before we even start. So that's good. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. We're going to be talking about AI for the coming 40 minutes, as it's quite often seen in the past 2 days. But we want to focus a little bit on not just on the AI side of things, but how do we actually get those AI models to be used? Because that's the most important thing for us. We don't want to have these AI models that sit around and no one cares. So we're going to be talking about the application. We're going to be talking about how the business is actually using the stuff that we have been building for the past number of years. So my name is Eduardo. I'm head of security analytics at ING Bank. And I have the pleasure to do this presentation with my very good friend, Rob.
And I'm Rob, senior data scientist in Eduardo's team, and indeed, very good friend. And primarily, I focus in the domain of identity access management. But most importantly, my role today is to bring a little bit of street cred by wearing a hoodie and having plenty of stickers in my laptop. Otherwise, you're listening to a guy with a tie, and then it doesn't work out.
That's not good, right? So let me also use this opportunity to really thank my team and obviously Rob and Iggy and Alessandro and Arlindo for being really a key part of the results that you're going to see moving forward. So let me stop talking about that. And obviously, when people talk about AI now, it almost becomes, unfortunately, I would say, it almost becomes a synonym, and people just talk about Gen AI. And there will not be any Gen AI in this presentation, so it's your opportunity now to leave if you want to see Gen AI. And I have nothing against it. It is great, but it doesn't tell the whole story at all. And if you're interested about the conversation between natural intelligence and artificial intelligence, which is a really nice conversation, I would recommend this little book for you. Extremely interesting, and it discusses a little bit the similarities and the differences between artificial intelligence and natural intelligence. So that's a good thing. It's going to be a lot of photos of food in the presentation, so I hope you ate something. But at ING CISO, analytics sits really at the core of what we do. So you have analytics there, and then you have the three main domains, so identity and access management, attack surface management, so vulnerability management, red teaming, and SDR, security detection and response. And my team provides analytics to all of those areas within CISO. And it's obviously a challenge, and that's also some of the things that I want to talk to you today. So what worked out, what was easy to implement, what didn't work out so well, and what we are now currently doing. So the journey, let me start. It's not easy, right? You want to take people who are overwhelmed by data and don't like data too much into being effective using data. And that's really, really important. So that's one thing. The second thing is that CISO, the organization is quite siloed. So you don't have the identity and access management people discussing too much with the folks in detection. And they also don't talk too much about, vulnerabilities and response. And they're kind of independent. And we want to move from that siloed view of data into an integrated view where that data can be combined and can really, really be used together. And I think we have made people aware. They are aware of data. They understand what data is and what data can do. And now it's time for us to work together. Now, but as I said, integration is really, really not easy. And if you think it's going to be like that, I will tell you already, it's not. It's not going to be easy. And it is really, really a journey. And well, we are from the Netherlands, as you can see from this photo there. And it's really a long process. And I think the main thing, there is a very important communication aspect that we need to be aware. But there are a lot of challenges because, I'm going to say that a little bit later, but the disciplines are very distinct in a way. Analytics and cybersecurity they don't have too much natural intersection. And we are starting to realize that I just told you a fib right now. There are similarities, but not at the surface. And the initial effort can be high, that you need to invest in having a team, and so on and so forth. And then you have a couple of oops. So, you know, you have a small team, and you have 13 POCs running simultaneously. And, you know, oh yeah, we're going to do one each quarter, and we're just going to get the results going, and then, well, it's not going to work. I think it's not going to work. So you really need to focus and have a small number of very targeted proof of concepts that you can run, that you can understand, that you can quantify, and so on. And, you know, doing these things, yeah, we're just going to have a POC per quarter and then just move on real quick. It's not going to work. Also, people have these teams with like 1 or 2 juniors, and they expect those poor data scientists to understand the whole spectrum and just be able to work. Yeah, that also doesn't work. So you also need to think a little bit about the distribution of talent you have in your team, and how do you start building that analytics team. And I think that's really, really important. And like I said, cyber is really difficult. I am a physicist by training and a data scientist, and been working in cyber for a number of years now. But cyber is really difficult. But I also tell you that also analytics is really difficult. And then when you put 2 very difficult things together, yeah, that doesn't equal to easy. So it is really, really complicated. Now, and then there is that. Should you build or should you buy? Now, I like to see that as not as a competition between vendors and you, because it's not. So we need to work with vendors. That's a fact. And these off-the-shelf products, they really provide a pretty solid base. I mean, you know, really good companies providing solid products, but, well, they all need to make a profit. So there are tiers, and there are things you buy, and there are things you can connect, and so on, which is fine, but we need a very tailored fit. So what we try to do in our operation is to use those tools from vendors, but then we tailor them to what we need. For example, we combine signals from different vendors together, or we use a specific part of an output and build a model on top of it, as we are going to show in a second. So that's, I think, a very good way to move forward. And this is another oops, and people just obsess about, yeah, let's build everything from scratch, and let's not have any vendor. Yeah, that also doesn't work, because you want to have all that control. And that's not good. I think that you need to understand that, like I said, those 2 disciplines are really, really difficult. And if you decide to build stuff, this is a big one, because someone would say to you, probably a data scientist, yeah, we don't need documentation at this, but they are lying. I tell you that we do. Because if you want things to be used, if you want things to be trusted as well, the business need to know what the heck you're doing. And they will not understand, and data scientists are not notoriously good at kind of explaining what a model does. They are good at showing results and so on, but really sitting down with the business, it's not our forte. So, and then you also have that, right? Let's just buy whatever. And then you end up with a zoo of products, and you don't know what to do either. So that's something that we should try not to do. And then you probably wonder, okay, you showed us a couple of things that worked, a couple of things that did not work. So what do we start with? And your company, you have loads of engineers, and then you have architects, and you have data scientists. So I think that's kind of professions that you all recognize in your companies. But these people don't necessarily talk to one another in the same language. And an engineer and an architect, I think they don't speak the same language, but they've been speaking to one another for a long time. So they kind of, okay, I know what you mean. But then you have this new entity coming in, the data scientist, and the architects really don't understand them, and the engineers also not. It's like, yeah, this process is cumbersome, or it's weird, I don't understand, it takes too much time, it's complicated. And then you have legacy tools, you know, like, who would have thought in the 80s that logs would be so useful, and they are horrible. Data scientists hate logs because they are just messy, and they were not made with a Python code in mind, I think. And you know, it's just complicated. There's so much of it. And then you have modern tools, which is great, but they don't necessarily connect with the current infrastructure you have. And then that creates a whole bunch of challenges, not only the connection between legacy and modern tools, but also the understanding between architects, engineers, data scientists, and so on. So I think that this is quite an important process to make sure that people understand. And one of the main things is the gap. There is a knowledge gap. And it's not to say that one is smarter than the other, but these specialisms are different. And we need to focus on bridging that gap. So the oops here is to think that, you know, architects and data, oh, they are both technical. They will get one another, and not necessarily. And, you know, also in building models, you hear legacy tools are not something we need to consider, which is also not true. You know, let's just do this POC and see what happens. And the last one, data scientists are also to blame, because they will say that, yeah, we figured out the data engineering aspect after. And then the thing you built, the POC that you are doing, is not made taking into account the fact that we want to bring that into production. And that's a little bit of a problem. So how do you know that something is a good fit for AI? And one thing that I say to my team, and I say that to myself all the time, is that it's not about the AI. AI is not the final product. AI is just a tool to get your analysts or to get your engineers to do something that they're currently doing. Maybe they do it faster, maybe they do it better, maybe they do it more accurately, maybe they don't have to do that anymore at all. So can I automate that? Can I simplify that? And this is really, really important, that you need a strategy around your cybersecurity, a data strategy around your cybersecurity strategy. So what are you going to do with that data? How do you infuse that team? And the use cases should not be defined by us. End of the story. The business, the areas within CISO should be the ones defining the use cases. And I strongly recommend to get support from senior management. Your CISO needs to be on board. They need to say, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's have a data science team. Let's use analytics. And it's kind of a meet-in-the-middle approach, where you need support from senior management, but you also need that grassroots movement. And I mean by that, find enthusiastic colleagues, find people who want to work with you. And that's objectively important. And speak to those people, bring those people together. And then your analytics, that analytics vibe starts to cross-pollinate and then just grows. And that's really, really important. And if you can, you should hire a storyteller. Is really important, because these people will be able to ask for time from senior management. They also be able to fight for analysts to, hey, you're going to do a day a week with our team, and we're going to build that model, and you're going to be able to spend 4 hours of your week looking at the results of our model and helping us understand, okay, I can do that better, I can do that differently, results are this, that's the feedback we have, and so on. Now, our roadmap, like I said to you, is not defined by us. And here you can quickly see a couple of things that my team likes to focus on. So on identity and access, and Rob will go through that, so I'm just going to leave that to him, those two topics. On attack surface, with vulnerability management, secure SDLC, those are really important things. On detection and response, obviously the whole process of monitoring, detecting, respond, reducing alert fatigue, and so on. Data leakage is incredibly important. How do we make sure that that doesn't happen? And on the education side of things, make your CISO data-driven. Make sure you educate people and you help them understand what do they need to do. Now, and this was the year for us when we went from moving away from a bunch of POCs to like, we're going to put stuff in production. And that's really, really important. So let me ask Rob to give you a pretty good example of what we did on identity and access management.
Thank you, Ed. Yes, indeed. So I want to share a real use case example that is actively being used and bringing value to identity and access management. And to share that, I want to share with you also what's a big sadness that we bring to our managers within ING, which is a concept called attestations. So in ING, people have access to different tools and environments through what we call business roles. And a business role is just a big collection of permissions and accesses. And a couple times a year, every manager gets an email saying, hey, you have to check all the business roles that all your employees have manually. So they get this big list. So if you have 10 employees, each with 10 business roles, that's 100 lines they have to check. Okay, Joe has this business role. Does he still need it? Probably. Let's say yes. Now, there's a lot of managers that know what they're doing, and they're like, okay, I make a conscious decision, but a lot of times, if you get 300 lines to approve, you're just going to go approve, 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 approve. So a big KPI this year for IAM was, can we reduce the number of these attestations, right? So you can see in January, we started with 600,000 attestations, and they told us, easy target, let's start with 5%. What was not so easy is that we now have a global tool for identity and access management, and in the beginning of the year, there were 600,000 attestations, but then we had a lot of different countries that migrated to this tool, so we added some more attestations there. But still, from 800,000 target to reduce by 200,000. So what do we do? So we looked at first at one of the culprits, which is the business roles. We have a lot of business roles in our system. So we said, can we reduce the number of those business roles? Either by cleaning up roles that are no longer necessary, so either roles that no one uses, or actually roles that do nothing. There are roles without any content. But likewise, can we simplify the landscape of roles by combining roles that are redundant? And this second one was a really big one, because in terms of risk and compliance, when we combined business roles, we had to do it in a way that made sure that everyone remained with the same accesses they had before. Because can you imagine I combine two business roles, and all of a sudden a person gets an elevated privilege that they didn't have before because of the combination? That increases risk. But likewise, if we combine business roles and somebody loses access to something important, that also can bring a big risk. And a little bit on the business role already explained. So like I said, the business role, they're like keys to a lot of doors in ING, and they are what give people access to what they need to do. And there's way too many of them. And we really want to reduce not only in terms of attestation, but also for visibility and better management. Because if you have way too many business roles, no one knows what they do. So if you need a new access that is not there yet, or you think is not there yet, the solution that people have is like, okay, I cannot really find them and search them. Let me just create a new one. And by reducing that, we increase security, and we improve the performance of the tooling. And the way that we thought about this was to look at all the business roles and all the members of the business roles. So here we have 5 business roles with 4 members. Imagine this is the full landscape. And we thought a good way to combine business roles without people gaining or losing permissions was, let's identify the business roles that have the same members, and they have had the same members for a while. And that's a little bit, I feel this side of the room is ignored, so I'm going to go talk to you for a little bit. We talk too much to these guys. So that's what we did. So if you look at those business roles that are highlighted, those 3 business roles, they have the same exact member. So why are they 3 separate business roles when we can merge them into one? And this sounds fairly simple, right? It doesn't sound like it's something that's super complicated to do until you start looking at the numbers. So we had around 80,000 business roles, 80,000 employees, and then if you start looking at the relationships, right? So it's millions of relationships and then billions of comparisons that we have to do. So it's a lot. But in my hubris as a data scientist, I said, it's probably easy. So I said, let's brute force it. Let's write a couple loops and do some brute force comparisons, put it to run, use TQDM in my loops to get an estimation, and then it said 10 days to run, and then within an hour, out of memory. I was like, fine, I have to do a proper job. So I thought, well, there's relationships between business roles that are connected between people. I went to see the ones with the same connections. Network analysis, that was a good candidate. So basically, every node was a business role, and my connections were the members of those business roles. And it actually ran, and it took a lot less than 10 days, 6 hours. But we also had some test cases that we prepared ahead of time, and we saw that not all test cases were caught by our network analysis. So it was a little bit of another dead end. But thankfully, even though Eduardo wears a tie, he knows a lot also about data science and analytics. So we locked ourselves in a room. We were visiting some colleagues in another country. And then we spent half a day in a whiteboard, and we said, can we find a simpler solution that runs better? And that's what we did. We created what we call our harmonization algorithm, and because internally we're very humble people, we named it after ourselves. And we went from 10 days to 6 hours to 2 minutes to run, just by rethinking the way we approach it. And at the end of the day, the algorithm is super simple, but to come up with a simple algorithm was difficult. And we'd like to share that with you. So we start with the table that has the list of memberships, right? So we have all our business roles, and you can see business role 1, Ava, Jakob, and Jan have the business role, and then Ava and Kasia have business role 2, etc. And what we do is we transform this table into what we call a co-membership matrix. And this was a very inexpensive transformation, so that worked out well. So it's a matrix where we have all business roles in the vertical and horizontal, and where the 2 business roles meet in a cell is how many people those business roles have in common. And the diagonal, of course, is the total members of the business role. And then we can define the diagonal and non-diagonal terms, and then we wrote our little algorithm. I'm going to tell you a secret now. Our team spent about 3 hours to say, okay, what's the fanciest way we can describe the algorithm so we seem very, very smart? And that's all. It's technically all correct, but it's way overcomplicated. I'll show you a simpler version of how the algorithm works. So this is the matrix. The first thing we realize how do we go from this to figuring out these 2 business roles that have the same exact members? Well, it's a symmetrical matrix, right? So the bottom half and the top half are the same, so we can throw out half of the data. That simplifies things. And then we go, let's look at business role 1. How do we know which business roles have the same exact members? Because now we just have numbers, right? 3, 1, 3, 3. How do we know that that means that all the members are the same? So we said, okay, let's look step by step. So first of all, the top left, that's the number of people that are members of business role 1. Business role 1 has 3 members, because that's the intersection of business role 1 and business role 1. And then we have to figure out from the rest of the business roles which ones have the same exact members. So what we realize is that we can look at how many members they are in common. So in this case, business role 1 has 3 members, and business role 3 has 3 members in common. And what we realize, to really make sure that all the people are exactly the same, we can look at the diagonal term, because the diagonal term says business role 3 has 3 members as well. So if one row has 3 members, the other row has 3 members, and also they have 3 members in common, they have to be the same people. And that way we can take advantage of like linear algebra and list comprehensions to write a very, very fast algorithm. And like I said, it's very simple, but wasn't easy to come up with it. So we do the same thing with all the other business roles. So same for 4, 3 in common. If we look at the diagonal term, also 3, all good. But if we look at business role 5, it has 3 members in common. But if you look at the diagonal term, business role 5 has 4 members. So we don't know if they are for sure the same 3 members, and we cannot combine 1 and 5 then. But what the algorithm comes up with is that we can combine 1, 3, and 4 into 1 business role. And this was there were some crazy results. I'll not name names, but there were situations where there was like 23 business roles that had 1 person using them, and the person was also the creator of the business roles. I guess they just wanted to feel important, say, oh, look how much work I'm doing. But this was a big thing because it allows us to really reduce the landscape without changing the access permissions. And in January, we identified 35,000 of those business roles that we could either clean up or combine. And as of this moment, we have already removed actually 15,000 roles. So I think we're doing pretty well. I think it made a big difference already. And now, I'm very scared to click again, but I will, because this is a very dangerous moment for all of us in this room. So I need you to hold on to your seats, because we're going to share our code with you. So it's dangerous for us because we have a lot of smart people in this room and later on YouTube that will analyze our code, and it's dangerous for you because you have to trust us that this QR code is not malicious. But you can, it's on GitHub, you can play with it. There's a function that generates synthetic data that you can play around that's very representative data, and then you can mess with the function as well to generate data that looks like yours. And yeah, curious to hear your comments about it. But from this, if we look at attestations, so we hit our target by going down to, by 40,000 attestations already. That's with the deleted 15,000 roles. And then we have another 5%, which we can still implement in the orange. And there's two other use cases that I want to share with you in less details. But what we're doing as well is transforming those memberships. So instead of having manual memberships that somebody manually requests and gets approved, is can we come up with automations or rules to say, OK, everybody in Eduardo's team has these business roles, so why not have a rule that if you are in Eduardo's team, automatically you get that business role. If you leave Eduardo's team, you lose it. And that way, by having this automatic, you can also reduce the attestations because it's part of a safe automation. And likewise, we're looking at unrecommending business roles, right? So it's the opposite of Netflix and Amazon, that they recommend everything to you. We're now looking at the other way around because we have a lot of people that worked at ING for 30 years, went through 10 different teams, and they keep collecting business roles. So that's also another big impact that we can have at the end. And our estimation is that we're going to be able to reduce attestations by 30%. So we went already 5%, but we believe that by end of next year, we can have 30% reduction. Now, that was it for identity and access management. Back to you for the other teams.
No, cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so that was pretty cool. And let me talk a little bit about the ASM area, so attack surface management. A very important thing is SDLC, right? And I think we all recognize that it's a massive problem. And you look at commercial tools like GitGuardian, for example, and we have loads of any, as any good detection tool, they have thousands of findings, and then you need dozens of people focusing on them and then going through these findings, and then you have, alert fatigue is really there. And the question is then, how do you prioritize? How do you determine which ones you look at first? And then, you're going to have sometimes for older findings, they have to dig so deep that this can take days. And it's a very high cost process because you need people to look into it, email and call and chat and so on. And it's not very fulfilling work. And I also care about that because I don't think, no one loves to go through those alerts, and then after a day and a half, you're like, oh, that's a false positive. So we decided to change the approach a little bit, and if you want to take a photo of this slide too, it's also okay, because that's the model that we put together, and I'm going to go quickly through what we did. So we collect data, and that's interesting because we're not only looking at our own data from the tools that we use, but we're also looking outside, and we're also collecting Kaggle data and ROCU and SecList, and those are important data sources for us. And on top of it, I say that we stand on the shoulder of giants because we decided to really go academic here and build upon academic literature on what science tells us, what's the right way of doing it. And then we just built upon that. And of course, we do standard things like tokenization and so on to make things better, more understandable, easier. And we infuse that academic knowledge with internal knowledge. So we also spoke to our own analysts to understand, hey, what makes an incident an incident? And what makes a false positive a false positive? So we also have this internal labeling, and then we moved on into creating some really clever features, and how do you know which features to create? Well, we also looked at literature, and those are interesting papers that we actually had to go through and had to combine. So creating n-grams, or, well, I have a lot of physicists in my team, so we always use entropy, even if we don't need it. But it's always great, it's always important. And then we did the traditional approach, train, validation, test, and so on. And then obviously there is the important bit, which is the loop, that we go back to the team and say, hey, that's the result we have. Can you tell us if that's good or not? And that's in production, that is being used right now. And we have labeled all of the cases that they have to look, and they weren't able to do that manually. And now, with the algorithm that we put together, they absolutely are. So let me give you a little bit of a comparison, and that's a real comparison with our data. So you have here a couple of vendors and the coverage that they have on two specific data sets. And then we see, some vendors showing 15, another vendor showing 82, and our internal two showing 99% coverage on specific and generic detector samples. But also on independent samples, we also able to score pretty well there. And we are really happy with that, because we are using information that's coming out of what the vendor is telling us, and we are augmenting and tailoring to what ING needs. And that's why the results are so good. Okay, so we now talked about cases that we did in identity and access, and in attack surface, looking at secrets, which is really, really, really important. One thing that I wanted to talk as well is on the education side, because we can't do our work if we don't work together with our colleagues in CISO, with our analysts, with the engineers, with the architects. So how do you do that? And we decided to create a foundation course, and I don't have time to go through the details of what the entire course is, but it is really interesting. It's a 2-day hands-on course that we did for hundreds of people in our CISO. And we showed them what this journey of AI is, what collecting and connecting data means, what is business-ready data, so cleaning data and so on, doing analytics, hands-on, what putting a model in production, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to have a model in production from a data science perspective? Then we also have the storytelling component. How do we sell the analytics that we built? How do we do that? And then they even have to pass an exam at the end of it to make sure that they are paying attention. So, if you see, for example, business-ready data, we say, okay, let's create some features with you. Let's make sure that you understand, how do I explain a penguin? Oh, that's that. You need to measure this, you need to measure the other, and so on and so forth. We also talk about the basics of analytics. What is analytics? Where does it come from? It's not a magic box. It's no sage making. There's no crystal balls. It's based on mathematics. It's based on statistics. It's based on things that we understand very, very, very well. And we also talk about what not to do in an organization. You can think, for example, of too much hype, right? So people really spending a lot of time hyping, Gen AI, we're going to do this LLM, and sometimes you don't need that. Sometimes you just need good old-fashioned AI, and you're going to have really, really great results. And the hype doesn't help us. We saw hype in the late 60s, and then we had 20 years of AI winter, and we don't need another one. Huh? So let's make sure we don't hype things too much. Now, and then what to do instead? So besides educating the organization, we also spend a lot of time with academia as well. So we wrote a paper this year recently that got published, and here's the QR code if you want to download the paper. So we talk about security detection and response there. So how do we reduce alert fatigue? And I'm happy to see that there are loads of colleagues that are present here in the room that authored this paper, so that's very nice. We also authored another paper when we talked about phishing, and that's important. So how do you do an analysis on reporting of phishing, on training of employees? How does training influence how your employees respond to phishing? That's also really, really important. Can you change the training? Can you improve the training? How do you do with phishing simulations? Do you need more? Do you need less? Do you need them differently? Are they actually working? There is also a QR code for you to download. Well, this is also very nice, right? I'm in this talk talking about this talk, but it is amazing that we are able to share with this community what also we are doing, and it's really, really great opportunity for us to keep sharing what AI can actually do, and not hype, but what we can actually do in analytics in CISO. We also have a lot of master students that come write their master thesis with us. So here's an example. We have 6 master theses that were done in I'd say a year and a half or so, in the last year and a half, and that's really great. One of them from Dan, I also presented last year at Black Hat, so that's really nice to see that Black Hat is also recognizing that, so thank you very much for, again, the opportunity of presenting here. And why do we do that? Why do we work with academia so much? And this is a good example. At the beginning of the year, and you don't have to read the whole thing, you just have to see the Gowers metric and hierarchical clustering, and all the groups within CISO were using that in some way or another way. And well, that ages me a little bit, but that's a master thesis I supervised almost 10 years ago, goodness, on clustering optimized weights for Gowers metric. And the idea of, hey, we can do that came from there. So it helps us tremendously as well on bringing that knowledge in and continuing to remain creative. And we have other theses here as well, and that really helps us to understand how can we bring that data together and so on. I want to thank you for your attention. We have some time for questions. I think we did well with time. And if you have any questions, the microphones are there, so just go ahead and let us know. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, please.
So you were putting something about DLP there.
Yeah.
We don't hear about it. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit about how?
Sure. Yeah, of course. We didn't talk about DLP in the presentation in detail because there was just no time. I mean, I have only a minute and a half just now. But what we did was very interesting, is that all the tools that detect leakage, right? Think, for example, through sending emails, right? They will create a lot of false positives. And then you need an army of people going through those and then being able to say, okay, that's actually a false positive. That's actually a false positive. And that's all they do the whole day, and that's painful to see. So we created a model that looks at that data and then fine-tunes that and said, wow, this is clearly a false positive. So looks at metadata, and then it's able to, first of all, reduce the number of false positives tremendously. And it's a simple machine learning model. It has a lot of feature engineering and a lot of how do we get the right data in. So we spent, I think, 80% of the time, shall we do it per email? Shall we do it per attachment? What data do we have access to? What data we do not have access to? How do I determine where the email is going? And is it a benign address or not? What is happening here? So the feature engineering took a long time, but it's a simple machine learning model. And we are able to not only reduce the number of false positives, but we are also able to catch stuff that we would otherwise, that could have potentially missed, right, by just not looking at it. So it is very interesting to see that this works and helps us to remain even more secure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm interested in the security implications of aggregating groups of people together. I'm just aware of some of the more entertaining security breaches at banks. Have been things like Jerome Cavil, who ended up over a period of, I think, 10 years with access to every single system in the bank. How you review and stop this becoming a way of people having too much permissions just because they've been aggregated together into these roles, and how you ensure that people, as those groups evolve, because they're not now named by their original function. In the way everyone else does it, you say, this guy does P&L reports, therefore should see P&L data. If their names are separated, how do you drill back to what can be determined as what that sort of person should be able to access?
Well, that's the pinnacle question of everything we're doing, indeed. So we do have to follow the principle of least privileges, of course. We just started this journey of identity and access management, so we're looking at the landscape that exists and reducing that first, but that's indeed the next step also with having the importance of having better descriptions for your roles and your permissions so you truly understand what they are, and better descriptions for the people. So that's also something that is in our pipeline, to be able to then to really understand, also looking at the application things connect to, and looking at patterns on the jobs that people do, the applications people access, to try to find better patterns to have the least privileges possible for people.
Okay, thank you.
And we are out of time. I'm so sorry. I'm happy to take more questions. I'll speak to you later. But thank you very much for being here. Thank you for the questions.